we're able to resume. We're still waiting on people coming back into the room, but just in the interest of time. So our next presenter is James McPhail. He's going to talk on the role of governance in realising decision advantage in the data age. James, you want to join us on at the lectern here? Marge, you'll be able to advance your slides for you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I think it's probably prudent to say that if we hear maybe more alarms, we might act on those for those in the room, but we'll wait and see if the warden's going to come in and give us some further advice. So I will remain agile. So good morning. I am James McPhail. I lead enterprise level data strategy, policy and governance work at the Australian Department of Defence. I too would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. And I would like to thank Standards Australia for the invitation to present to all of you on some of the work that Defence is undertaking at the moment, not specifically to the geospatial realm, nor into the technical realm, but at the strategic level, what we're doing. So I'll present on Defence's journey so far in strengthening its use of data for strategic and operational effect, and in particular where Defence is going on its journey under Defence Data Strategy 2.0. So for those in the room, there are a couple of hard copies of that at the end of the room there for you to collect. Slide, please. Slide, please. So first, a short bit of context and background on Defence in Australia and its organisational structure. So the Australian Defence Force is constituted under the Defence Act of 1903. And jointly, the Australian Defence Force, which comprises the military services and the Department of Defence, are referred to as Defence. In addition, the Defence portfolio includes a number of other departments and agencies. It's like the Australian Submarines Agency, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Defence Housing Australia. There's a range of other agencies and departments in there. I draw your attention to the organisation structure at a very high level, which shows that we have a number of ministers and also quite a significant number of sub-organisations, groups and services within the Defence organisation. And those are articulated there. And that includes the three military services, the Navy, the Army and the Air Force, and all of the other enabling groups and component parts of the Defence organisation. Defence achieves its mission and purpose through the conduct of operations and the provision of support for the Australian community and civilian authorities in accordance with government direction. The provision of strategic policy, the development, delivery and sustainment of military intelligence and enabling capabilities, and the promotion of regional and global security and stability as directed by the government. Defence performs a very wide range of activities on behalf of government, everything from the application of military power through to the development of policy, intelligence, vast logistics and supply chain work, even to running hotels, schools and hospitals. So the purpose of this slide and context is really to point out Defence is very large, it's very complex, it's plainly very important, and it's been around for quite a while. And so all of those factors in aggregate go to making standardisation, both in the general sense and especially with regard to data, of vital importance, but also quite a challenge to get right. Slide, please. So how do we do it? In late 2021, Defence released its inaugural Defence Data Strategy 2021 to 2023. And this was a strong signal of the importance of data to the achievement of the Defence mission. As the Defence is evolving to a future-focused fifth generation warfighting force, we're bringing online increasingly advanced capabilities which are more and more significant users and producers of data. An overarching strategy is necessary to cohere and guide and standardise the efforts across Defence, that large federated organisation, to treat data as the strategic asset which it is and realise its full value. The first data strategy did a lot in terms of building the foundations in Defence for data, and among those enshrined the 5 driving principles of govern, trust, share, discover and use of our data. And so as a result of that first strategy, Defence now has a data division led by a senior Chief Data Integration Officer. It has an organisational approach to data governance supported by decision-making bodies, articulated roles and responsibilities, and a policy framework. And our governance framework guides this federated model of central direction but decentralised execution, where the data division led by the CDIO sets that direction to empower that decentralised execution throughout the Defence organisation. It's the way in which we make it work. So to make that model work, standardisation is pretty vital. We're also well on the way to having our first enterprise data platform in the One Defence data platform, which will enable data integration, analytics and warehousing at scale across the enterprise and really get the value out of our data. So we've come a long way in a short time, but there is a lot more to do. And so that leads to the second Defence data strategy, which was released earlier this year. Which sets the vision that Defence will be a data-centric organisation that uses data to enhance its preparedness, optimise service delivery and realise decision advantage as a prioritised capability effect under the 2024 National Defence Strategy. Slide, please. So a quick one on decision advantage. It's the vision of the current strategy, which is really a continuation of the journey that the first strategy led. It's not fundamentally new or different. It's a continuation of that journey. It provides that guiding direction for Defence, that big organisation, the North Star for all of our groups and military services to strive toward. And so the thrust of Data Strategy 2.0 is to realise decision advantage, which at its core is making better decisions faster. And it's it's easy to say, it's super simple to say making better decisions faster, but actually there's quite a bit really in an organisation like Defence that needs to go into that. And we'll go through some of that in a little bit. And so that demands that standardisation through the effective development of strategy, but also the policy and governance arrangements in order to succeed in achieving that vision. Slide, please. So this is what I call the SOAP, the strategy on a page, which is really how we align the priority and effort across Defence to realise decision advantage under this strategy. It's a coherent set of 20 initiatives, which are the ways in which we will achieve those ends of decision advantage through the strategy. And there's a lot of interrelationships between those initiatives. It's also important to note that as a strategy document, it is distinct from a plan. So it's not a plan in itself. There are supporting plans underneath this. And so it's the simple view is that if Defence can achieve those 20 initiatives, it should therefore realise that strategic vision as a strategic capability effect. So there's a lot of work underpinning some of these, in fact, all of them. And an example is it's quite easy to say something like enhanced trusted data exchange between the strategic centre and the deployed edge, but it can be quite challenging to achieve that in practice and quite a lot's involved to get there. And so the role of the strategy is to cohere and direct a range of those efforts towards that guiding North Star. Slide, please. So given the focus of this stream on policy and governance, I figured I'd focus a bit of time on the govern principle of the strategy and some of the things that we're doing in that space. So at its foundation, Data Strategy 2.0 is about taking our data and extracting the value from it. The first strategy really established the concept of our data as a strategic asset, and it is, with assets being something from which value can be derived. Where this strategy drives next is that necessary step of realising the full value of those assets at scale across the enterprise in increasingly sophisticated ways. So a key element underpinning that approach is in our data governance pillar is enhancing standardisation efforts to also empower and enable areas throughout Defence to innovate at the speed and scale demanded by the 2024 National Defence Strategy. So a big part of achieving of this strategy is pursuing a data mesh approach to our governance architecture and data. And so there's four key principles of mesh that we're pursuing there. We already have a federated system of governance in place, but evolving that system of governance to a data domains structured approach, which is happening at the moment. We're doing some work in that space now. A self-serve data platform, which the One Defence data platform is front and centre in achieving that. And then I guess the evolution from a data asset management approach to a data product management approach, where people are more freely publishing data products for use across the organisation, and really, I guess, improving the accessibility of our data and the usability of our data across defence. Slide, please. So on this slide is just a pretty simple articulation of our enterprise data policy framework and the supporting array of other frameworks that go to some of the more technical elements of data management. Our policy framework undergirds the governance arrangements by setting direction on how to manage and use data across defence, while allowing the ability for functional areas to adapt to solve their specific problems. So we have a tiered approach there. At the top is our Tier 1 policy on data, very creatively named the data policy, which is a principles-based policy which applies across the entire organisation. It's very high level, says things like, we need to share our data better to get better value out of our data. Underneath that is a second tier of more specific policy statements covering certain subject matter like data security, like data sharing, where more, I guess, direct guidance and direction might be required, the rules of the road per se being articulated. Underpinning that is where our frameworks and some of our other guidance material exists, which really supports the how. So a simplistic view that we take is Tier 1 is why are we doing these things? The Tier 2 is what must be done. And then the Tier 3 is more that guidance on how do areas actually interpret and apply the rules to achieve the outcomes that we're trying to drive. And on the right there is a bit of a map of what those frameworks and guidance cover. You'll see at the bottom there is the more group service, any local guidance, SOPs and that kind of thing, where if needed, they need to apply our direction, our frameworks on how does a specific business area actually go through and do these activities in a way that is compliant with the superior policy direction. So the real trick is on striking the balance between standardisation and agility, so that you're actually serving the needs of the user. And I think I heard one of the presenters before saying we don't just do policy because policy is fun. Policy actually has to serve a purpose. And a really good example of where we've gotten the policy settings pretty right is on data sharing, where that policy instrument, which has a whole heap of statements on what people must do, is actually seen as an empowering.
This now concludes the evacuation training. Any tones generated beyond this point will be actual tones. Please follow the instructions of your floor warden. Thank you.
Excellent. There we go. So on the data sharing policy, there's a whole heap of statements of, people must do this to enable that principle of we need to share better to get the value out of our data. What we've seen is that's an example where that policy has been grabbed across the organisation and people are using it, they are wielding it to get access to data. It filled a policy gap. It has actually enhanced the ability to have our data shared within ourselves, which can be problematic or previously certainly was an issue, whether it be for security reasons or risk or privacy or technology reasons. So that's an example where the policy has actually filled a gap, provided that direction, but empowered the action that we're trying to achieve instead of what some people would view in terms of governance and policy as being a blocker or a barrier. And so that's the I guess the ethos of our policy development is it helping our business areas actually achieve those higher order outcomes. Certainly what drives us in the work that we do. And so that's why we have that tiered structure of the principles-based policy, the rules of the road, and then the frameworks to support the how, and the underpinning the local area guidance on how areas might need to specify that in their own space to make it tailored and relevant to their context. Next slide, please. So That concludes the presentation, but I'd like to offer a couple of the lessons learned along the way in terms of the role that governance has played in defence on driving those strategic outcomes through standardisation. So first, standardisation is a critical enabler in an organisation as big and complex as defence. I don't think people in this room would argue with that statement. So starting with a standardised purpose or a vision, like achieving decision advantage, is a great place to start. And then the cascade down of the governance arrangements, the policies and all those enabling elements is good next steps. The second is that we do this through a range of strategies, policy and guidance, but bringing people on the journey is essential. Even in a data-driven, I guess, environment in which I work, where I think it's easy to view data and technology as being a large part of the solution, you won't get far without the people being on board with what you're trying to achieve. So bringing the people on the journey is essential. Finally, despite what I said about standardisation, there must always be the ability to adapt to achieve the mission. And so governance, good governance, is actually a critical enabler of that ability. You can access and download the Defence Data Strategy 2.0 on our strategic planning webpage, which is shown there. You can also reach out to my team at the email address on the bottom, and happy to hear from anyone on this presentation. And so finally, my thanks, Alan, for the opportunity. Any questions?
Yep, that's great. Thanks very much. I'm sure there will be a couple of questions, but thanks for your patience with the fire drill. I think a lot of people would agree with those 5 words that you've got there. The data is to be governed, trust, share, discover, use. You know, they're very, very universal, really. So does anybody before I've got a question? Yep.
Yeah. So as part of the data strategy, I don't see there, you have a data infrastructure concept there, because you have data infrastructure.
Yeah.
So the core of the data infrastructure is interoperability. You need a standard for that. Yeah. So for the different data, do you have a different standard per civilian?
So part of the challenge in our environment, a big part of our challenge is the ecosystem in which we operate, where we have to integrate and interoperate with ourselves as a large complex organisation, with other Australian government entities, whether that be state governments and bushfire assistance or COVID assist are examples of where we've done that successfully, with foreign militaries and other government agencies as well. So how we interoperate with such a wide ecosystem of partners and the different standardisation approaches across them is a challenge, a real one. And I was actually saying to Chris in the break, actually part of the work is standardising the standards approach. And so we're doing that work. One of the most recent frameworks in the tier 3 of that policy framework that I showed is a standards framework. How does Defence actually achieve the right standardisation with the right standards across the organisation? And at the heart of that is identifying, I guess, the best areas in defence with the subject matter expertise to really be an authority on that. So geospatial standards is an example. We have an Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation, which is, you know, a pretty good place to start when it comes to how would we standardise a geospatial approach, just as an example. But yeah, it's a real challenge, and you know, a lot of work to push through it. But that's something that we're doing.
Thanks very much. Another question.
Regarding your button diagram, which is really excellent with all its capabilities, I also felt like, and I'm in open data New Zealand government, making a data sharing agreement is critical a lever to enabling data sharing. And I wondered if you also have considered a data acquisition policy.
Yeah, so data sharing agreements are critical and people go to them almost straight away. What we've got is in the data sharing space, a lot of work has been done on getting that right. So we've got the high level policy and the middle level policy. We've got a framework that articulates how those policies are interpreted. And we also have what we call the data interface management specifications, which is essentially a far more streamlined approach to achieving data sharing agreement within defence. So we had previous agreement approaches that existed, which took sometimes quite a lot of time to actually sort out, with pretty significant bodies of work into themselves. And so one of the big things that we've done is really try and streamline that to what is the minimum requirement to put in a formalised agreement to just enable the data to share, right? And that's the thing is how do you, and with the people piece is how do you, I guess, unlock that data sharing as a behaviour. And in an organisation like Defence, where security is so critical, people's natural inclination is not to share. And so at the very top of that architecture, our defence data policy says it is a requirement to balance the need to know, which is very familiar to all defence people, with a responsibility to share. And it's about changing that risk calculation from what happens if I share this information and something goes wrong, which is a very reasonable thing to think about, and you need to also how do I balance that against what happens if I don't share this information and decisions are made without the benefit of the best information available. And often that is a harder one because it's a bit more unseen. It's the not. And so we've started with that tier 1 policy that says you need to balance these two concepts. You don't just open the floodgates and share everything. You still have to balance the security, but you have to balance those two concepts and flow that down into a framework that articulates how, and then the tool of, all right, well, if a formal agreement is required, what is the minimum that we can get away with that enables that sharing in a secure way that preserves the data that we need, but actually enables the sharing in a quicker way. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, one more question.
You mentioned about the framework, the standardized framework. I'm wondering if Australian Defence uses framework like UAF, which is an information architecture framework, for managing the assets or informational assets. And would the policy and governance is open enough to try a tool like Spark Systems Enterprise Architect? I'm from Spark Systems. To use a tool like EA to enable the framework being implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an open conversation, or is there something implemented inside the defence?
So in terms of specific tools, I don't have an answer for this forum.
Okay.
But if you want to reach out, we can pick up a conversation on that, and
that would be fantastic. We currently work with UK Defence, and we can share the case studies and we can work on that.
Yeah. So that would likely go to our CIO organisation, our digital group. But reach out and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Jay.
Too good. Okay. Thank you all.